Somewhere in a weathered outbuilding in central Illinois, a 1955 Oliver 88 still starts. The man who owned it is gone. The dealer who serviced it is gone. The company that built it is gone. The tractor is not. That gap between what endures in iron and what disappears in a boardroom is not accidental. It is the direct consequence of an engineering philosophy so thoroughly realized that the machines outlasted every institution built around them. Oliver didn't die because it failed. It died because it worked too well for the world that replaced it. This is the story of what that cost. In the spring of 1929, 4 independent implement manufacturers signed their names to a merger agreement and became one company. Oliver Chilled Plow Works, Hartpar Company, Nichols and Shepard Company, and American Seeding Machine Company combined to form the Oliver Farm Equipment Company. On paper, it was a consolidation of distribution networks and manufacturing capacity. On the factory floor in Charles City, Iowa, it was something else. Hartpar's engineering staff, the men who had coined the word tractor and built gasoline-powered farm machines since 1901, became the technical conscience of the new organization. Their methods, their tolerances, their refusal to release a machine that hadn't earned its specifications, transferred intact into the merged entity. The Charles City plant ran 3 shifts. The overhead chain hoists moved steadily through air that carried the smell of iron filings and cutting oil. Machinists who had learned their trade under Hartpar foremen dressed engine blocks to the same standards they had always held, under a new logo but the same unwritten obligation. A longtime plant worker from that era recalled that it didn't feel like 4 companies had merged. It felt like one idea had finally found enough room to become real. Oliver's first consolidated tractor line, the Oliver Hartpar Row Crop Series, reached market in 1930. It carried an adjustable wide front axle, an engineering accommodation that allowed a single machine to cultivate multiple row spacings without retooling, a detail that mattered enormously to a corn farmer managing varied field conditions. The merger had given Oliver resources. What it gave American farmers was a company that treated engineering as a competitive philosophy, not a cost center. The machines that followed would make that philosophy impossible to ignore. Through the late 1930s and across the post-war decade, Oliver built the tractors that defined its reputation. The Model 70, introduced in 1937, featured a high-compression gasoline engine engineered to run on regular-grade fuel at a time when premium fuel costs were a meaningful operating burden for working farms. The engineering rationale was practical, not promotional. Then came the 88. Introduced in 1948, the Oliver 88 became the company's flagship row crop machine and was regarded by the contemporary farm press as among the most balanced power-to-weight designs available in its class. Its engine, a 265 cubic inch 6-cylinder unit running at a rated 1,600 revolutions per minute, was built for torque at low engine speed rather than peak horsepower at high speed. That distinction mattered. A tractor pulling a loaded implement through heavy ground needed torque that held, not horsepower that peaked and fell. The 88 held. Nebraska tractor test results for Oliver machines in this period consistently ranked among class leaders for fuel efficiency and drawbar pull, documented figures that carried more weight with farmers than any advertisement. At the Nebraska test facility in the early 1950s, engineers in rolled shirt sleeves crouched behind dynamometer carts with clipboards flat against their thighs, watching the drawbar pull needle hold steady at loads where competitive models had begun to drop. The tractor ran at rated speed. Nothing strained. Nothing apologized. The Super 99 followed, pushing into the high horsepower segment with a General Motors 2-stroke diesel option, producing approximately 72 horsepower at the drawbar, a figure that outperformed most competitive offerings in its displacement class. A farm equipment dealer from rural Ohio recalled that when farmers came in to compare, the Oliver's throttle response under load was the thing that closed the sale. It pulled like it had more engine than it showed. Oliver's Hydra electric system, introduced on late 1950s models, delivered live power takeoff and live hydraulics, meaning implements could function independently of the transmission. This was not a luxury feature. It was a working farmer's demand, answered in steel and hydraulic line. The machines earned the loyalty they received. In 1960, White Motor Corporation, a Cleveland-based manufacturer of commercial trucks, acquired Oliver Farm Equipment Company for approximately $60 million. The acquisition logic was straightforward: distribution scale, dealer network coverage, manufacturing capacity. White was not buying an engineering philosophy. It was buying market position. 2 years later, White acquired Cockshut Farm Equipment of Brantford, Ontario. A year after that, Minneapolis Moline joined the portfolio. 3 distinct tractor engineering traditions, each with its own factory staff, its own design standards, its own dealer relationships, now sat under a single holding company whose core competency was moving commercial vehicles. White's management began rationalizing production across all 3 brands. Shared chassis components arrived first. Shared transmissions followed. Then shared sheet metal. What had been 3 genuinely differentiated machines became 3 paint schemes applied to a common platform. The practice of badge engineering, selling mechanically identical or near-identical tractors under the Oliver, Cockshut, and Minneapolis Moline nameplates with color as the primary differentiator, was not announced. It arrived quietly in parts catalogs and production schedules, in the gradual disappearance of the specifications that had made each brand distinct. A former Oliver dealer described the moment a Minneapolis Moline parts catalog arrived on his counter, with Oliver part numbers relabeled on top. He said he didn't know what to tell the farmers who still came in asking for Oliver parts, because he wasn't sure anymore what Oliver parts actually were. In a White Motor boardroom in Cleveland in 1963, men in suits reviewed a cost matrix. On one side, the expense of maintaining 3 independent engineering departments. On the other, the savings from one. The number 1. It always wins in rooms like that. Oliver didn't die because it failed. It died because it worked too well for the world that replaced it. The compromise had been made. The question was how long the name could carry what the machine no longer contained. In 1969, White Motor formally dissolved the Oliver, Cockshut, and Minneapolis Moline brand identities into a single consumer-facing entity. White Farm Equipment. The Oliver name, which had carried 39 years of engineering credibility, was retired as a primary brand. The White Field Boss series became the unified product line. Machines engineered to a consolidated specification, drawing on purchased powertrains rather than proprietary development. The Field Boss 2135, produced in the mid-1970s, ran a Cummins diesel engine. Cummins built reliable engines. The point was not reliability. The point was that Oliver's tradition of in-house engine development, of building the power unit to match the machine's specific torque and speed requirements, was finished. The engine now came from a supplier catalog. When the global oil disruption arrived in 1974, depressing farm commodity prices and compressing equipment margins across the industry, White Farm Equipment absorbed the pressure across a cost structure already strained by the overhead of 3 merged engineering and dealer infrastructures. A rural implement dealership in Western Ohio in 1972 told a quiet story. In the window, a faded Oliver promotional poster. Propped against it, a White Field Boss brochure. At the counter, a farmer with a part number written on folded paper. The parts man turning pages in a cross-reference catalog listing 3 brand names for the same component. 3 names. 1 part, 1 margin. White Motor Corporation filed for bankruptcy in 1980. White Farm Equipment was sold, changing hands as a standalone entity into a recovery process that left its dealer network thinner and its engineering identity reduced to a label on a consolidated line. Through the 1980s, White Farm Equipment passed through multiple ownership groups. Allied Products Corporation acquired the operation and attempted to stabilize it, consolidating White's farm equipment business with New Idea, a tillage and harvesting equipment manufacturer, under the White New Idea brand. Each transaction brought new management carrying the same calculation: rationalize costs, protect margins, manage the decline without accelerating it. In 1991, AGCO Corporation, a newly formed agricultural equipment holding company assembling a portfolio of acquired brands, purchased White New Idea. By 1993, AGCO discontinued the White tractor line, ending production of machines in the Oliver lineage. The tractors sold under the White nameplate in those final years shared platform components with AGCO's other acquisitions. No remaining thread connected them to the Charles City engineering floor of 1948. A farm equipment restorer in Charles City described the moment he understood that the factory that had built the machines he spent weekends restoring had gone quiet. The building still standing, the machines still running on farms within sight of it. No living connection between them. Parts availability for legacy. Oliver machines, the 88, the 99, the Super 99, became dependent on aftermarket suppliers and salvage yards rather than manufacturer distribution. The institutional knowledge that had specified those machines, the tolerances and material choices that made them worth restoring, existed now only in service manuals and the hands of men who had worked on them for decades. Oliver didn't die because it failed. It died because it worked too well for the world that replaced it. That is not an epitaph. It is a finding. Oliver tractors are no longer manufactured. AGCO holds the remnant intellectual property of the Oliver and White lineage and has not revived the Oliver name commercially. What remains is the machines themselves. A correctly maintained Oliver 88 from the early 1950s remains mechanically capable of light field work today. Its engine, built for low-speed torque rather than peak output, favors longevity in exactly the way its designers intended. Nebraska Tractor Test records from Oliver's production era remain publicly archived, consulted by collectors and historians as documentation of what those machines actually delivered. Not what marketing claimed, but what the dynamometer measured. Collector organizations maintain active membership. Restoration forums carry detailed threads on rebuilding original carburetors and sourcing components that manufacturers no longer stock. At a farm auction in central Iowa on a late October morning, a 1955 Oliver 88 sits at the end of a row of more modern equipment. The paint worn to primer at the hood edges, the engine cold. When the bidding opens, the number climbs faster than anything else on the lot. Farmers who never owned one, and grandchildren of farmers who did, push the price past what any rational parts calculus would justify. A retired agronomist who had farmed with an Oliver 88 for 22 years was once asked why he never replaced it. He said it never gave him a reason to. That sentence contains the entire history. The weathered outbuilding is still there. The tractor inside it still starts. Nobody planned for that. Nobody built a business model around machines that would outlast the companies that made them, the parent companies that acquired them, and the buyers that followed. The men who engineered the Oliver 88 built it to work a farm for a generation. What they could not have anticipated was that it would survive every institution assembled around it. Oliver didn't die because it failed. It died because it worked too well for the world that replaced it. The machines remain in the fields. The standard that built them does not. That distinction is the only eulogy that matters.